Okay, it's about 1 minute after the hour. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment's monthly press call. I'm Executive Director Joe Barella. Before we dive into the state of unemployment insurance in Colorado, I'd like to share an update on the Colorado Jumpstart Return to Work Incentive Program. We are happy to see the level of participation of Coloradans reporting they returned to work between May 16th and June 26th of this year. As of that timeframe, 18,670 claimants opted into the Colorado Jumpstart Return to Work Incentive Program. So far, 7,470 people have been paid the first installment of their incentive. Remember, participants needed to maintain gainful employment for 8 weeks in order to receive the full incentive. Incentives will be paid in 2 installments, the first half approximately 4 weeks after opting in, and the second half approximately 8 weeks after opting in. So far, more than $5.2 million has been paid in the first installments. We will publish this data on our dashboard weekly every Friday if you need that information. Federal benefits are ending. We want to remind everyone that Colorado remains committed to participating in the federal pandemic benefit programs as long as the federal funds are available to eligible Coloradans. The expiration date to these programs is fast approaching. We are prioritizing getting claimants ready for this transition, returning to work for the remainder of the summer. Outreach efforts are underway to provide claimants receiving federal benefits the resources and connections they need to be prepared for the end of these programs. We are focusing on getting these folks back into the workforce so they are not reliant on these funds come September. The week ending September 4th is the last week claimants can request payment under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, the Pandemic Extended Unemployment Compensation, or receive the supplemental federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, which is the $300 weekly enhancement. Before I get to Ryan with details on the June employment situation, I'm going to hand it over to our Chief of Staff here at the Department of Labor and Employment, Daniel Chase, to give an update on common questions that have come up in recent weeks. Daniel?
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Daniel. I'm the Chief of Staff here at the Department of Labor. I've been asked today to come discuss with you guys specifically around our fraud processes and fraud data that has been requested of us, and we've been trying to dive into exactly what the request is and how we can provide that data. So we have dove into our claims data. And so the question that we get is how many claimants have passed ID.me, have verified their identity through that process, but are still not getting paid. So we dove into our data last week. We got some information and some queries, and we pulled that together, and we wanted to release some numbers to you guys today. With a little context. So out of that query, we're breaking it up into 2 different groups. So the first group is going to be those that are still on hold as a result of suspicion of fraud. So just because you clear ID.me doesn't necessarily mean you have removed all suspicion of fraud from your claim. So once those come through, we verify that against what we see on the claim and what triggered those fraud holds. And then we determine at that point whether it's an auto release claim or whether we continue it on hold pending further investigation and further fraud analysis. So that's our first bucket. The second bucket that we'll release today as well is the non-fraud related issues that are holding pay. And so ID.me clears identity issues and most fraud issues, but it doesn't clear things like able and available or requests for back dates and other things that may set an issue on your claim that needs to be adjudicated by us to determine continued eligibility. And so those are normal issues. Those are normal through the UI program. And so we did pull that data as well. So again, the first group that we pulled is the fraud related one. So as of July 1st, our system showed that approximately 4,310 claimants were still on hold after passing ID.me as a result of continued suspicion of fraud. And so just to reiterate that ID.me is not the solve all for all fraud. We know that there are different fraud techniques that claimants can pass ID.me but still be committing fraud. A couple examples of this, I know CBS 4 did a report of a gentleman in Denver who's being prosecuted by the Secret Service Just keep in mind that that individual would have passed ID.me to clear his own claim that's in our system, but he was filing several other claims on other people's behalf from his family. So while he passed ID.me and verified his identity, he was still committing fraud, and our system would have seen that and would not have released his claim as a result of ID.me being passed. Another example that we've seen a few times here is a parent, a mother, a father who are using their children's social security numbers, their sons or daughters, who are too young to work, who have never worked, who would not be going to work, but using those to file in our system in order to collect additional benefits. And so again, mom or dad who has their own claim would have passed our ID.me verification, but they are still committing fraud in our system, and we would have detected that as well. So I just want to clear that up, that just because ID.me is passed does not mean that we will release every single claim that passes that. We are still investigating them. We also have seen, as Phil will get into a little bit later down this press call, we've seen an increase in hijack claims. And so when a claimant passes ID.me, we can still see through our analytics that that claim is likely hijacked and not in control of the claimant. And so while they passed ID.me, it still requires additional investigation to determine whether or not the claimant's in control of that claim and whether or not the claimant can get access to that money again. So those ones we are working through both manually and through more in-depth analytics. And so we are working through those claims relatively quickly at this point. The second batch that I had mentioned, that bucket, is those claims that did not pay as a result of non-fraud related issues. So maybe they went in, they certified their weekly benefits, and they indicated during that certification that they are not able or available to work. And so as a requirement of both federal and state law, claimants in UI must be able and available to work. We have some exemptions for COVID-related circumstances, but those are the only exemptions that exist there. So once they request those benefits, that then sets an issue on their claim, and that will hold that payment back until we make a determination as to whether or not they qualify for benefits for those weeks. So that number, just to release that today, is 3,790 claimants are on hold as a result of non-fraud related issues. So I'm happy to stay on for any questions here at the end. And yeah, thank you guys so much. I think Ryan is next for us.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it. As always, I'm going to talk about the most recent data for the employment situation. The data I will discuss today are based in part on estimates from two surveys, statistics like the unemployment rate, labor force, total employment, and the number of unemployed derived from a survey of households. This is otherwise known as the current population survey. Simply put, the household survey is meant to capture the employment and labor force status of individuals within Colorado during a given period. The household survey also includes the self-employed, independent contractors, farm workers, and those not attached to traditional payroll employers. However, we do not have those specific breakouts at the state level. Non-farm payroll job estimates come from a survey of business establishments and government agencies and are intended to measure the number of jobs, not the number of people employed. These estimates exclude employees in agriculture, private households, and the self-employed. As we noted in today's press release, the reference period for the establishment and household surveys was the pay period a week that includes the 12th of the month. So the reference week for June was specifically June 6th to June 12th. Therefore, these data provide a snapshot of Colorado's employment situation as vaccination rates among the adult population continued to increase and pandemic-related restrictions were relaxed for businesses across the state. Revisions to June data, along with preliminary estimates for July, those will be released on Friday, August 20th. For the household survey, Colorado seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was unchanged in June at 6.2%. While the number of unemployed individuals did drop by 2,000 last month, the unemployment rate remained unchanged due to rounding. Actually, an additional unemployment decline of 700, that actually would have moved the state's rate down to 6.1% on a rounded basis, for those who were curious. The US unemployment rate increased slightly to 5.9% in June. Since November, the average monthly difference between the Colorado and US unemployment rates has been about 0.3 of a percentage point. In June, Colorado was tied with Maryland and Mississippi for the 35th lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Nebraska had the lowest rate at 2.5%, and Connecticut and New Mexico had the highest rates at 7.9%. As I have highlighted in prior press calls, the share of Colorado's population actively participating in the labor force, otherwise known as the labor force participation rate, that has rapidly recovered compared to most of the nation. While the state's labor force participation rate has ticked down slightly since April, it is still very close to the pre-pandemic rate of 68.7%. The June rate of 68.5% was the third highest in the nation last month, and only the Dakota states ranked higher. For comparison, the US participation rate last month was 61.6%. Colorado currently has the 8th fastest recovery in the labor force participation rate in June relative to the rate in February 2020. I have mentioned this before, but Colorado's relatively fast recovery in the participation rate is a driving factor in keeping the state's unemployment rate elevated compared to the rest of the nation. If the US had a rate of recovery in the labor force participation rate similar to Colorado's, the national unemployment rate would increase from 5.9% to 8.1%. I have provided a walkthrough of that calculation and the talking points we'll distribute later today if you're interested in viewing that. As we have mentioned in today's press release, the counties with the highest not seasonally adjusted unemployment rates were Huerfano, Pueblo, Gilpin, San Miguel, and Fremont. 17 Colorado counties had June unemployment rates that were under 5%. A year prior, that number only totaled to 6. Among the 7 metro areas in the state, Pueblo had the highest unemployment rate at 8.7%. Boulder and Fort Collins had the lowest rates, both at 5.5%. Denver, Colorado Springs, Greeley, and Grand Junction all had rates that were between 6.3 and 6.9%. And as always, it is recommended to compare all these sub-state rates I mentioned to the statewide not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate, which was 6.3% in June. Moving on to the establishment survey, the preliminary estimates show that on a seasonally adjusted basis, Colorado added 10,800 non-farm payroll jobs from May to June. Additionally, May payroll figures were revised up slightly by 400 jobs. And that altered the change from April to a gain of 17,500 rather than the originally reported gain of 17,100. As always, a reminder that monthly revisions are based on additional responses from businesses and government agencies since the last published estimates. Colorado's over-the-month change of 10,800 non-farm payroll jobs ranked as the 18th largest nationally in June. The state has added 92,900 payroll jobs in the first 6 months of 2021. That ranks as the 11th most jobs gained so far in 2021 compared to all other states. Colorado has now regained 276,400 of the 375,800 non-farm payroll jobs lost in March and April of last year. The total job gains of 276,400 over the past 14 months represent a recovery of about 74% of those lost jobs earlier in the year, which ranks at the 16th fastest rate of recovery in the nation over that period. A similar analysis of the change in the US non-farm payroll jobs since April of last year revealed the US has added back a little under 70% of lost jobs. At the sector level, a number of industries had positive gains in June, and only a few industries had relatively minor losses. Leisure and hospitality, once again, had substantial gains, adding 5,300 payroll jobs last month. Within that industry, accommodation and food services gains total of 2,000, while arts, entertainment, and recreation payrolls grew by 3,300. As a reminder, accommodation and food services is made up primarily of hotels and restaurants, while arts, entertainment, and recreation is made up of a wide range of businesses like amusement parks, golf courses, casinos, zoos, and museums. 2 other super sectors added at least 1,000 jobs last month. Professional and business services added 3,300 jobs. And with the high-paying professional, technical, and scientific services sector accounted for 60% of those gains. Trade, transportation, utilities payrolls grew by 1,000 last month. In the first 6 months of 2021, when looking at the state's 18 industry sectors, accommodation and food services has added the most jobs at 49,300, or 53% of all total non-farm payroll jobs added. Arts, entertainment, and recreation has the second most gains at 13,000. Accommodation, food services, and arts, entertainment, and recreation, they make up the leisure and hospitality industry super sector. Professional, scientific, and technical services has added 8,600 jobs in 2021, while government payrolls have increased by 6,700. On the other hand, however, information payroll numbers are flat in the first half of the year, while other services, construction, and finance and insurance have experienced varying levels of job loss. Overall, the private sector has added 10,500 jobs in June, with May payroll numbers just slightly revised upward by 200 jobs. From May 2020 to June, private businesses have added 284,000 payroll jobs, compared to losses of 362,200 in March and April of last year. And that represents a recovery of about 79% of private sector jobs lost, which does outpace the US recovery rate of 73%. That translates then to Colorado ranking as the 12th fastest recovery in private sector job gains in the nation. Finally, here are some numbers of jobs added in the first half of 2021 for substate Colorado, particularly the 7 metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs, and the remainder of the state that is not in an MSA. The Denver MSA added 52,600 jobs, or 57% of the 92,900 total over that same period. Colorado Springs has gained a little over 10,000 jobs. Fort Collins and Boulder have experienced similar increases in payrolls at 6,000 and 5,300 respectively. Greeley gains over that period equal 1,700, while Grand Junction and Pueblo payrolls are positive, but under 1,000 over that 6-month period. The remaining 47 non-metro counties have combined to gain an aggregated total of nearly 16,000 non-farm payroll jobs in the first 6 months of 2021. And a lot of what I talked about today obviously be sent out in talking points, but are also included in the supplemental charts that we provide with the press release. I think we have some UI questions first, so I'm going to kick it over to y'all for the UI responses. I'm going to look at what we have on my end for the employment situation.
Ryan, we're actually going to go to Phil first.
We're going to go to Phil first. Great. Phil.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for joining us today. So I'm going to go over a couple of quick items here. One related to scams, result of what we're having to do as a result of some of those scams, and roll out some new items coming here. And also some other things that may be of importance to claimants here in the next few weeks related to processing time on unemployment insurance claims. So as I address scams first, this is very timely. There was at least one news outlet in the Denver metro area that yesterday morning ran a story related to Colorado being the 10th most scammed state in the United States. So very timely. And with that being the 5th most reason was identity theft. So we've talked a lot about scams here, targeting claimants in our previous press calls, and this problem isn't going away. It's increasing in frequency. So we continue to see phishing text messages and emails going around claiming to be us, pressuring claimants to click on a link and enter in their MyUI Plus login credentials. Again, a quick reminder here, claimants should not click on these links. There are a couple of news outlets here today that have actually run stories related to this previous warnings that we have provided. I'd like to thank those organizations for taking the time to educate their readers and their viewers, and also try to prevent problems for those individuals who may be on unemployment. I would encourage the rest of you to make sure that you're trying to disclose this to individuals freely and openly, so that again, we can try to avoid the hijacking of unemployment insurance claims that's attempting to occur here. This is only going to continue to increase. So For an example for claimants, if you receive a text with a link and part of the URL says lock in your bets, that's obviously a scam. However, some of these phishing texts look very close to our link. So again, don't click on any of the links within those text messages. The safest way to navigate to MyUI Plus is by getting through our official website, coloradoui.gov. As a note, our partner ID.me is also seeing a significant increase in social engineering tactics here in Colorado and across the country. So if you're not familiar with social engineering, basically these are scammers who create elaborate and sometimes believable lies to convince claimants to hand over their PII and even their banking account information. As an example, we talked about last week individuals receiving phone call messages to press a number and speak to an individual. That individual will act and seem as if they are processing an unemployment insurance claim for us. In fact, they usually focus in on fraudulent activity on a claim and then encourage that individual to provide them with that personally identifying information, at which point in time the claim is hijacked. Purpose of these kind of hijackings is so that those individuals can take advantage of people who have already passed through ID.me, update and change banking information on those unemployment insurance claims. So when the unsuspecting claimant goes through the week and certifies for weekly payment, those payments aren't received by the claimant. Those payments then are ultimately received by the fraudster, who in turn may go back into that claim and change that checking account or change that banking information back so that when the claimant goes and looks, it appears as if there had never been a change on that claim. So again, we ask claimants that as you are certifying for weeks or before you certify for weeks, please verify your banking information at that point in time. So as we've noticed, they're even going so far, these fraudsters, as advertising fake job openings on social media. Then victims are willingly handing over sensitive information, thinking they are speaking to a hiring manager. Again, there was a report on this on an outlet yesterday morning discussing the fake job postings and the fact that then they start asking for social security number and that type of information from you. The reason for that is so they can either file a claim in your name or try to see if you have a claim that they can hijack. So ID.me has also seen an uptick in scammers pretending to be victims on social media, and they're using the same manipulation they use on desperate claimants to trick them into giving up that personally identifying information to try to trick the ID.me support team into verifying them. We know we've shared this in the past, but these brazen fraudsters will also try to use these tactics on members of the media after seeing stories of local news stations helping victims get their holds cleared. I want to make clear that still the vast majority of individuals coming to you are actual individuals who are having problems with claims, but contained within them are fraudsters trying to socially engineer each and every one of you. And so every organization on here that has sent us names of individuals, most have included at least one or two fraudulent unemployment insurance claims. As a result of what we're seeing related to this hijacking of unemployment insurance claims, we're going to need to find other ways by which to protect our claimants. As such, we're going to roll out multi-factor authentication in early August. This is to better safeguard innocent claimants from having their claims hijacked by criminals. And so we will be implementing this within MyUI Plus. Multi-factor authentication is also referred to as MFA, or two-factor authentication, and is commonly used on websites and banking portals to offer higher security. It is a business best practice or an industry best practice. All claimants will be required to set up their MFA starting in early August. We know some people will have struggles with that, but again, the means for this is to reduce those number of claims that are hijacked and taken over. So all claimants will be required to set that up in early August again. This simply means the claimant will have to set up the use of more than one method to verify they are who they say they are every time they log into MyUI Plus. So when a claimant logs in, they'll be required to both enter a password as well as a code that is sent to them via a verified phone number, email address, or authenticator application. Again, this is a best practice, and most digitally savvy Coloradans will be used to this process. However, again, we recognize there continues to be a digital divide among our claimants, and we will be over communicating how this process will go to active claimants until the launch date. We've already begun telling claimants that this is coming, and we are preparing our call center agents to answer additional questions from claimants who may be unfamiliar with the process beginning August 4th. This is again to begin walking individuals on how to set up that authentication process for them. Final note that I have for each of you today is we've had many questions on claims that aren't being paid. At some point in time, we've been operating under an executive order that has allowed for payment of unemployment insurance benefits while we are processing unemployment insurance claims. At some point here in the near future, that will go away, and it could go away as early as August of this year. When that goes away, what that means is when there is a separation on a claim, it will hold up payment until we process those unemployment insurance claims. So from that point on, we'll be back to adjudicating as we had always adjudicated prior to the start of the pandemic. Remember that executive order was part of an economic decision to ensure that benefits could be placed in the Colorado economy in a timely manner. Based on data that we had looked at and reviewed prior to the pandemic, we had looked at numbers, and it was evident that it would be unable to process those unemployment insurance claims in a timely manner to provide timely payment to claimants at that point in time. But at this point, as we are exiting the emergency, as the governor had removed those emergency orders last week, again, these will be changes forthcoming. A reminder for everyone, normal processing for an unemployment insurance claim during non-pandemic times in order to provide due process to both claimants and employers and obtain information from both is generally 4 to 6 weeks. During a pandemic, during a recession, that amount of time tends to go up as a result of the volume of work that is received. So it could be that individuals, sometime in August, if that comes, could be expecting to wait longer to receive unemployment insurance benefits. And with that, that concludes my updates today. And Ryan, I think we can roll back over here to the questions, and maybe we'll hand it off to Daniel Chase to moderate us.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to hit the first UI related questions here from Andy Kenny. Andy's asking, can you give any expectation of wait times for getting those issues cleared? So again, we've got fraud and non-fraud related. On the non-fraud, I don't have a wait time in my head right now based on what I've seen. It depends on the issue. Some issues can be determined at the call center agent level. Those are going to be quicker than others. Some issues do require an adjudication to take place, and that also includes fact-finding both to the claimant and employer in some cases. So unfortunately, I don't have just a set time for when those would be cleared. On the fraud side, on the fraud-related issues, we would expect that out of those claims that we mentioned are still on hold. It's likely that we won't be releasing many of those after we do our full investigation. It's that there's high suspicion of fraud, and there's high likelihood that there is fraud taking place on the claim. Again, either as the claimant committing fraud themselves or as the claim was taken over or hijacked by a fraudster, in which case there's still fraud going on, and we will need to do work on that claim, and it may even require us to strip the claim out and refile a new claim. We have seen that a process that has increased in volume for us is allowing new claimants to file over fraudulently filed claims in their personally identifiable information. And then Andy, you're asking if we have a breakdown of industries that the workers come from for the Jumpstart program. Ryan, I don't believe we've done analysis on the Jumpstart program as of yet, but I'll turn it over to you to answer that one.
You're correct. We have not. So we may have that data. I'm not sure, but if we do, I'd be interested to look at it too. So if we have that, we'll share that with you.
We'll follow up on that one. And then Andy, your last question there, who should be prepared to lose benefits in September? So this is a good question, and pending any further congressional action that may take place between now and then, any claimant that is on standard state UI that has a balance remaining after September or after the end of August, they will have benefits available to collect. All other claimants, if they are on PEUC, if they are on PUA, any kind of federal program, all those programs will expire as of September 4th, week ending September 4th for the state of Colorado. So that includes also standard UI claimants who exhaust their balance. Leading up to that, they would also lose benefits at that time as well. Charles Ashby asking, do you have any figures on the number of people who were suspected of trying to remain on unemployment because they did not want to return to work due to making more than they might make on the job? The answer to that is no, not really. We don't necessarily, that's not freely given to us by the claimant always. In our report of job refusals. That can be done either through the employer or the claimant. And so we do adjudicate those normally. Phil, any additional information you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I will say this is a quick reminder to remember there are various reasons where individuals will refuse work that is offered to them. As you'll note, far earlier last year, we were giving you standard numbers at that point in time related to refusal rates, but not every one of those refusals at that percentage was a result of an individual receiving more money on unemployment as opposed to other factors involved. So other factors that could be involved, Charles, at this point in time also involve the county in which an individual perhaps is being offered the work, related to vaccination rates, and whether there is a prevalence of the Delta variant going around at this point in time. So again, I know there are counties such as Mesa that are extremely low in their vaccination rates at this point in time, and also we're seeing an increased amount of the Delta variant there. So that could be a factor that comes into play why some individuals may refuse work, going into work and dealing directly with the public there. So again, a reminder that there are multiple reasons that an individual might refuse work, not just because it appears that they're receiving more on unemployment insurance benefits. And as Daniel has mentioned, that's something that people don't freely disclose to us, so it does take investigation to do. And previously, did we have some people that were doing that? Yes. Reminder that that's considered fraud under both the FPUC, which is the additional $300 per week payment, and then that cuts individuals off from receiving any of those payments subsequent. So for example, Charles, if we had somebody that's the reason they refused a job when FPUC was $600 a week, and then they found work and they became unemployed again, and they were filing their claim now, they don't qualify for that additional $300 per week.
I'm going to hit a couple more UI questions, and the rest I think are for you, Ryan. Rick Salinger asks, I have this text from CDLE that asked me to verify my identity to be eligible for unemployment. Is this an example of phishing fraud? Phil?
That's a perfect example of phishing fraud, Rick. I will tell you, my sister over the July 4th weekend handed me her smartphone and said, "What is this from you guys?" And I said, "That is not from us. Please don't click on that link." So Rick, if it helps, my sister doesn't have an unemployment insurance claim. So they're also hitting anybody and everybody they can. I will tell you, this is a good indication, Rick, that perhaps you have had some of your information exposed in some hack in the past, whether it be Equifax, Target, Facebook, or elsewhere. So it might be an opportunity for you to make sure you're taking the appropriate steps, as we would ask any claimant who receives one of these texts out of the blue, to maybe take the appropriate steps to ensure that they are protecting themselves and their information across the board.
And as a follow-up, Tamara, no, CDLE does not text claimants, and we especially do not text claimants any links of any kind.
We will never text you a link. You may occasionally receive an email that has a link in them, and that is why we ask you to carefully look at those links. And again, point out that if you are ever in doubt that it came from us or not, please log into your MyUI Plus account the way you normally would, going through coloradoui.gov first.
And last question before I turn it back to Ryan. Lori asked, the claims on hold are not getting paid, so the governor's executive order to push out benefits does not apply for those two buckets. The governor's executive order is a state executive order. It can get us around state UI laws, but as you know, UI is governed between both the federal and the state levels. And so there are federal laws that we must comply with moving forward. The executive order specifically applies to separation issues. So normally when a claim gets filed, as Phil said, during normal adjudication times, that claim would then input their separation and their employers in the last 18 months or so. We would then talk to the employers, figure out what this reason for separation was, and determine based on that if they're eligible for benefits. That's the piece the executive order addresses in the 2 weeks, roughly 10 days time frame that it gives us to pay people. So Ryan, do you want to address some of your questions?
Let me just I know Matt just sent a question too about, Daniel, do you have the number for the amount of people you expect to lose benefits in September once the programs expire? I could touch on some data, but so we probably don't have an exact number. But what we do have, again, is we produce the weekly continued claims numbers by program, specifically regular UI, pandemic unemployment assistance, and PEUC, which is the extended benefits once your regular benefits expire. For the most recent week, we had about 18,000 continued claims for PUA and around 67,000 continued claims for PEUC. While they may not be a one-to-one match for one person, those add up to about 85,000 individuals if we use that kind of approach. So I expect those numbers to continue to decline as we get closer to September. But right now, when we're talking about the beginning of July, that's a rough estimate on how many potential claimants we might have on that program, on those two programs that would expire. And then obviously the other one is FPUC, which for all claimants just adds that extra $300 a month. Let me scroll up here. Let's see here. So Charles, so while the state rate remains unchanged, my 6-county area in the Western Slope increased by nearly a percentage point in some counties from May to June. Any idea why? Yeah, real simple is that the county level data is not seasonally adjusted, and we typically will see an increase in the not seasonally adjusted rate from May to June. So just looking at the counties, there are 52 counties that actually experienced increases in the not seasonally adjusted rate from May to June, and that's out of 64. And also the state rate, not seasonally adjusted rate, increased from 5.8% to 6.3%. So really, it's just kind of an indication of the typical movement we see as we shift into the summertime. Aldo asked, can you discuss what the labor force participation rate recovery looks like based on gender, and how far off is the rate for female participation? So with detailed data like that, take a little bit of a different approach. We don't, we have monthly data, but I tend to prefer to look at 12-month moving averages for data like gender. And so we actually just pulled some data yesterday. And so for the 12-month period of July 2020 to June 21, the female labor force participation rate is 61.4%. And that's compared to a 2019 annual rate of 62.9%. Again, using the 12-month averages, we might be losing some of the recent gains. For males, the most recent 12-month average is 74.1% for labor force participation, compared to the 2019 annual average of 75.1%. So both are getting there. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at what the U.S. Comparison would look like to kind of give it a relative sense, but hopefully that helps, Aldo. Matt asked, have we seen any significant job gains in Colorado's energy sector with the rebound oil prices? So we do have a chart within the in the supplemental, a couple charts in the supplemental portion of the press release. But in the first 6 months of 2021, mining and logging, and it's primarily going to be dominated by the oil and gas sector, payrolls have grown by 800, so pretty small. But what we're basically seeing is since essentially, I think the losses more or less bottomed out at the end of last year, and we've seen some gradual improvement over time. Just for reference, mining and logging in February and April of last year shed 2,300 jobs. Since April, losses of 3,900. And as I just mentioned, there were gains of 800 so far 2021. So really between May and December of last year, there's an additional like 4,700 jobs lost in oil and gas. So we are seeing some recovery, but it's not mirroring the increase we're seeing in oil prices. All right, let's see here. Tamara, Ryan, would you explain the labor force decline of 2,200 jobs in the June household survey? Also, do you have data on employers? And can you tell if the numbers have gone up or down since February 2020? I'm not sure by employers, are you asking for the count of employers or something else? We have data from the quarterly census of employment and wages, which does look at the number of establishments. However, the most recent data we have is through December of fourth quarter of 2020. So it is pretty dated. We are seeing some increases in the number of establishments. And I'm happy to talk about that with you offline. I haven't looked at the data in a bit, but we did see increases in establishment counts in 2020, surprisingly. But I think it's going to take us it could take 6 months to a year to really get a full picture of what employer kind of trends look like during the pandemic and after the pandemic. In terms of the labor force decline, I think we're going to expect to probably see the labor force participation numbers and the labor force numbers bounce around a bit for the remainder of the year. As I mentioned, in April, the participation rate reached that pre-pandemic level of 68.7%, and it's dropped back down to 68.5%. So I think it's some natural volatility, and there is going to be probably a cap where we see that labor force participation come up. So I wouldn't read too much into just 1 month trend. Over the year, I believe we have, let me just pull something up. So over the past year, labor force has grown by 42,000 in Colorado. And so I always emphasize, just look at the longer term trends. So if we start seeing labor force drop, by large numbers in the second half of the year, then I think that'll certainly be something to look into. But all told, 2,200, the labor force decline by 2,200 is pretty low. And keep in mind, that's that's out of a labor force of 3.1 million. Gabrielle asked, with the state adding nearly 11,000 jobs, but the unemployment rate staying the same over the past month, how does the state get people to take these new jobs while deterring people from applying to fraudulent job posts? I won't get too much into the fraudulent job post part, but we are seeing strong gains in employment so far this year. Strong recovery, as I mentioned, compared to the rest of the nation. But in terms of, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the fraudulent job post. Sorry. And am I missing anyone else? Sarah here says several employers in Western Colorado counties are reporting labor shortages linked to limited housing availability, resort towns. Are there any indications that confirm labor shortages in certain industries in Western counties? I haven't done a ton of sub-state analysis. A lot of what I look at is going to be at the state level. I'm sure there's pockets of the state, the nation, various industries that are having difficulties, but that could also vary within that industry. There may be employers who aren't having difficulty hiring. It's also important to think about, like, what wage are you offering, right? And what is your availability of labor? And housing in certain areas, I'd say most of the state is going to be an issue to consider with either limited housing or higher prices. And Tamara, so I did touch on your point, but again, that data is pretty lagged. So our Q1 data is going to come out end of August, but we won't have that second quarter data until November. So unfortunately, I think it's wait and see. And with that, did we miss any questions, or are we caught up?
I think we're caught up.
Okay. I think we could adjourn then.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time today. And follow up with us if you have any additional questions. Thanks.
Thanks all.